Welcome back to the Restaurant Growth Show podcast. Today, we're joined by Jason Radisson, the CEO and founder of Movo, a platform focused on improving hiring, engagement, and retention for frontline workers. With over 20 years of experience scaling successful companies like Uber and 99 Taxis, Jason is passionate about empowering the workforce that drives industries like restaurants and hospitality. Jason, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. I'm glad that we're able to finally connect. I know we got rescheduled there several times, but life gets in the way of podcasts as it does. But before we jump into our questions here, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey as to how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Jason Radisson, I am CEO and founder, as you mentioned, of a company called Movo, which is, we like to describe it as a battlefield program. It helps you to manage a really large workforce, site by site, and everything in real time in a very modern way. I started my journey doing blue collar work and frontline work. I grew up in poor circumstances as the kid of a teenage single mom, and I did all kinds of jobs, including restaurant jobs. I was a short order cook, high school and college, and waited tables and had a lot of those experiences. I did a bunch of other jobs along with those. And as I look at the world, on 20 plus years of working in technology, I look at all of these opportunities to put technology into people's hands and really help make their lives better. And founding of Movo was fundamentally to do that, to figure out a way to digitize and really just help support frontline work.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We're really excited to learn more about Movo. Can you tell us some practical ways our restaurateurs can improve their hiring and retention using tools like Movo?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen, and maybe just to go a step back a little bit, I had this experience and I just kind of fell in love with the technology of the gig economy when it first started coming out. And I worked as you mentioned at Uber as an early Uber regional manager, launching cities, scaling up the business in different markets. I think what was so interesting about the technology for somebody who had been working in technology was this opportunity to just make the work so much more fluid and so much easier. If you can open up a mobile app, you can run your whole workday in the mobile app. And that for me was really I saw it as a life-changing technology. When it comes to hiring and retention, we used to use the platform back in my ride sharing and delivery days to drop into a city, and you drop in with a small team, 3, 4 folks, hire some temps to help man the phones and that kind of thing. And we go and hire 5,000 people a week. And we'd onboard them and we do all of these things. And so the technology, I think fundamentally, the best way you can hire is to take all the friction out of almost everything that isn't necessarily adding value to the process and make it as quick and painless as possible for everybody. So specifically, we did a ton of hiring over the last couple of years. At Movo, we've hired more than 700,000 people over the last couple of years. And it's a mobile experience. You get a link as an employee or as a prospective employee, you get a link, you download the app, you follow a couple of prompts, and you're hired, pending, maybe a drug test on site or whatever the final sort of first day stuff is. You're ready to go. We do the background checks, e-verifies, all of the, sort of official steps all happen in the background. We've been able to do that in multiple countries. It's not in strictly one jurisdiction. So I think, as a restaurateur, I'd be looking at the ability to just make hiring pretty self-service, at least all the bureaucratic steps of hiring, and, really think about recruiting as the selling the job, putting the human touch on that early employee experience. On the retention spot, we tend to really focus more on the nuts and bolts of somebody's availability and them getting the kind of schedule and the kind of hours they want. And a lot of that, there's technology. And my advice there too is, we're all, I think, facing in so many places. And it's, I'm sure you have listeners that are overseas. It's a fact of today's world. We have lower birth rates and we just have less workforce. And we're all really focused on productivity and retention. And one of the things we found most helpful is just if we can use the technology to give people the schedule that they need, it matters a lot. The schedule they need, the hours they need, which fundamentally is the earnings they need. There are other things that have a longer term effect, but like just short term on retention, the more we can do there, the better the impact we've been seeing.
That's amazing. So I'm curious, are you familiar with, say, Seven Shifts or Prosper? Right.
Sure.
So yeah. So from a scheduling standpoint, what sort of differences does Movo provide, or is it similar technology?
Well, we've got our technology is tuned to the employer. So there's a lot of technology out there, and not to be all about Movo, but if I talk a little bit about our tech, the problem that we're trying to solve is like what's the ideal schedule for everybody? Like what's the win-win in scheduling? And there are various things that go into that. Some of it is some of our large clients are in union environments and you've got union requirements and constraints. You've got the whole overtime thing and when you can afford as a restaurant owner to have overtime and when you can't and when you have no choice. And then you have the individual employees' preferences. And the thing about those is they're all a little bit in opposition. They're not 100% aligned. And you've got to find an optimal blend for that particular restaurant, for that particular employer. And what we've been doing is on a case by case basis, really tuning that to each individual employer. The more sophisticated the system is, too, the more it's able to sort of also swap employees. So, in our case, we do automatic substitutions. We do peer-to-peer substitutions. I mean, we call them shift swapping, but they're not a quid pro quo. It's, I pick up the shift this week for you, and hopefully, in the goodness of your heart, you pick one up next week. That's fine. In a broader shift swapping with a broader pool of employees, we can put the shift out for people to first come, first serve pick up. So we're really able to have a very balanced schedule. And I think the other thing that's critically important in kind of a large hospitality or restaurant situation is the ability to drive the whole roster off of the schedule, off of ultimately the demand. And, that's a feed that could be something that's as straightforward as we actually have a really clear forecast. We know, how many patrons we're going to have per minute. And we know that 60 days out, or with a fair degree of accuracy. There are a lot of things that we help our clients with there to get really precise on the schedule. And then that ultimately flows through. If we know the demand, then we have a very precise schedule. And, day in, day out, minute by minute, we're able to sort of update our calculations there and get more accuracy. So it's more of a holistic solution, with kind of multiple technologies and algorithms. But the net of it is it magically makes sure that you have exactly the number of people that you need at every point during the shift. Ideally, it's as close to everybody's preferences as they want. And I think that's very different from you've got a calendar and the calendar gets pushed out, or, in some of the softwares, people put their preferences in and then the supervisor has to go in and pick people. Ideally in Movo, you don't even have to worry about that stuff anymore. It just automatically is the most perfect schedule that you can have.
It's incredible. We are in the age of automation. Some of these
Yeah.
things, some of these things are we think are automated take a lot more, say, legwork than we would like, but we're on this path, and that's incredible to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think that
you notice a lot of it, a lot of the bigger and more complex the business, like the more the technology just helps. Maybe to state an obvious point, but you really notice it if you're trying to schedule 10 people, yeah, that's fine. But if you're trying to schedule 12,000 people, across several hundred sites, then, you really sort of get that scale effect. And, ultimately, these are just computers talking to each other. If you've got a per restaurant minute by minute forecast, and then that just flows over, to the scheduling side. The other thing I should mention is I think there's a huge opportunity in frontline work to get more precise on tasks. And the technologies have just gotten all so very cool. So like, if you take something that's a little bit more roving, like sanitation work, right? And, end of shift work and kind of the typical things that are very checklisty, you know, the way the technology works anymore is you have a mobile device, you've got a bunch of tasks in that mobile device, and all of them interact with the real world. They interact with NFC codes, the chips that you have around the restaurant. They interact with, in that case, your inventory, or they can interact with your inventory. They can interact with physical locations. You can take pictures and videos. You can communicate around those things. You can chat about, different items as they're being worked on. The whole world of kind of task management for frontline work is an area that we're really excited about. And it's, we're sort of standing on top of all these technologies. They've all blossomed, whether it's NFC, where, I mean, we work with these, they're 50 cents, and, if they get tampered with, they stop working. They're kind of these magic things, to where literally you could put them on each, bottle of condiments. And, if you go with the cheap ones that are like 5 cents or 3 cents, and, all the way to geofencing and QR codes and all this cool tech that's out there. Not to mention computer vision and a lot of the use cases there where, it's possible to, in a central kind of remote way, just have all kinds of intelligence about what's going on out there in the real world in your business.
Big time, big time. No, I have a really good friend of mine that I'm not gonna plug in for him, but he used to be in NCR and now he's on a startup that it's like also everything is like vision and computing, all sorts of crazy things, and it's grocery, but it's just amazing how we've come through into this. And one thing that comes to mind is that as you were starting to share this is the problem that you're solving. I think that for Gen Xers that are bosses, you're solving a lot of the problem with the millennial and Gen Zers.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And we've heard it, and as you know, we do business in other countries, and I think it's in the US, definitely it's sort of like, especially the younger generations coming up. A lot when you start going overseas, they're like, "Hey, like our whole country works off of mobile and WhatsApp."
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's the natural place they go. And then, what are we supposed to do? We work for this big US multinational company. We take them in and we show them like a mainframe system. Like they don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
Never mind, they're not gonna stay with us if that's how old-fashioned all these tools are. So, we've thought a lot about it, and I'd be the first one to admit we're fairly late in the mobile technology curve. Like mobile's been around
Yeah.
at scale since like 2008, right? With the iPhone. But all that said, I think there's still in some parts of the economy, there's still a long way to go. And, I think we talk about frontline work. It really hasn't been digitized the way that, white collar sitting behind the computer monitor has.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
what is the Slack of, hospitality? I mean, if it's not Movo,
Right.
it's, who's next?
Right, right, right. It often starts there, even, we work with Fortune 100 kinds of employers, and a lot of smaller guys too. And, one of the first things like, well, we don't really have an employee app. And it's like, well, it's 2024, almost 2000, there shouldn't be much debate about that. And, we do hear sometimes employers say like, oh, I don't know, we can't give them mobile technology. It's like, you know, think about what we were doing in ride sharing 10, 12, 15 years ago. We were employing in 3 seconds 1 million people on a mobile app. Are you telling me that, like the technology doesn't scale, or people won't accept it or whatever? Like we've proven it with 10, 20 times as many employees as you guys have, right? So it's like we all know it needs to go there, but it just happens to be one area of the economy where the technology gets adapted really slowly.
yeah. I think it's also very smart to think about the world where there's been a condition where in countries like I'm from Colombia, so I follow really
Mhm.
close what it is. I mean, Canadian, but
Yeah.
is that they never went through a computer. They jumped from nothing to a
Yeah.
smartphone,
Yeah.
and that's it. That is it. And
Right.
that's why WhatsApp
Right.
is so strong. The delivery companies like that grew up so fast, like Rappi and the expansion and the need and it's just incredible. I agree. Mobile is the way to go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But switching a little bit and actually picking on what you mentioned about growth, from your experience scaling companies like Uber and 99 Taxis, what are the key lessons for restaurant owners that they can apply to drive growth and efficiency?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot in there. I'll try to think of a couple of the top ones. I think generally as a philosophy, I would say lean never win out. And I always think about growth in the sense of like anybody can grow a company if you have unlimited capital. The real differentiator is whether or not you can do it efficiently. I think it makes a lot of sense, and we've done in the gig economy, you know, hundreds of cities. So if you look at any of the big gig economy companies, they've got 500 cities, 700 cities, whatever. There's a lot of playbooking and there's a lot of standardization in there. You sort of test the model. And I think it applies, definitely to chains and kind of large scale operations. Like if you can get that model really, really honed in, then all of that can be standardized. And I'm sure the big guys do that today. If you have launched 30 restaurants in the last month, and you probably know exactly, and you're probably doing exactly what I'm talking about. For smaller guys or guys that are just starting out, folks that are just starting out, I think it's really sort of getting to that point where you know the efficient playbook. And then a lot of what we worked off of was sort of what I would call almost like partnering, where, basically the launching that we were doing today to scale was based on the learnings of the last cohort. So, in my case, I ran the state of Nevada, let's take it, and the state of Florida was a year ahead of me and my team. And our goals and sort of our playbooks were geared off of there. We started at the playbooks of the previous kind of sister market, and then we added on top of that, and it really gave sort of a nice cooperation because my peer who, done everything a year earlier could sort of tell me what he learned, what he would do, what he wouldn't do. It was a great knowledge transfer. And then my team and I had to start there and beat it. And I think there's a lot to be said for taking the playbook, but like building into the mechanism for launching an imperative to beat the playbook. And if you do them sort of out of sequence time-wise, then like it's not a direct competition. It's not like internal competition that harms anybody. It's a friendly internal competition, like for bragging rights. And the knowledge transfer goes really well. And that, I think we did that religiously in the gig economy and the companies that I led and in the regions that I led in the gig economy, where we really tried to, every launch should be at the best in the world per our current knowledge. That would be one of my biggest on scaling, and that I know is fairly high level and specific to a certain size of company, but it's definitely the key to kind of everything. And if you look at 99 Taxis, we took 50 million bucks in a Series C. We had 50 million with an option to take another 50. And on that 50 million bucks, we grew the business $1 billion in a year. So you can be extremely, extremely capital efficient if you're doing it in the right way. And it forces some of these discussions like, hey, we're looking at this city, we're trying to find a pair for this city, or we're looking at this neighborhood and we're trying to find a pair. And we actually don't like the starting conditions of this neighborhood. Maybe we should just avoid it. So you end up with a lot of those portfolio management discussions early on that kind of help you to avoid the pitfall of like trying to scale in a market that's not ready for you, trying to scale in a market that just doesn't fit you very well.
I love it. I love it. I mean, and it's full Kaizen, right? Continuous improvement. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And the added twist of that world is it's all vector based. So it's, if your goal is 80% growth per month or 40% per month, or you're all looking at the curve. Is this city where it should be at week 12 versus the sister city and so on. So there's a lot there, somewhere in there, there's some articles and probably some books to be written about how we did in the gig economy. There's some really cool stuff, some really cool analytical techniques and just kind of the nuts and bolts of scaling in there that I think a lot of industries could benefit from.
So I want to take
Agree.
a quick step back. You mentioned, the global workforce and how there's
Yeah.
really not enough workers nowadays. And talking about hospitality specifically, the elephant in the room is that, turnover is a massive problem for
Yeah.
small restaurants all the way up to McDonald's. So, but can you talk to us a little bit about creating a more motivated and engaging workforce to reduce that turnover?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't have, the magic silver bullet. I think
Okay, we got to end this
technology
interview. This interview doesn't have a
I think technology, I think what you have to do is get to the best possible technology that you can for what you're trying to do for your use cases. And I think it's a philosophy from tech that I would apply to hospitality and specifically to restaurants. And it's, the employee should be operating with the best tech available, not with some old crappy system, not with pen and paper, not with all those inefficiencies. Beyond that, I mean, if you can apply tech in a way that they are spending their day in a maximally productive way, in theory, if we're doing everything right, they're also earning more money because they're way more productive. And so put it another way, put it in a like just kind of straight up economics way, if we can get them 30% more productive because of tech, that should be 30% more pay.
Yeah.
And that I think is because that's such a big, sort of low-hanging fruit that's been out there. We've really lagged on frontline workers 20 or 30 years technologically. Like that's where I would go first. And yes, it's, what we happen to be doing, but I think it's just more broadly, I think you can recognize out there in so many lines of work, right? I would say healthcare, we have a huge nursing problem here in the US, and same thing, and it's retention and burnout and everybody's overworked and and yet the technology that they have on the job is not great. So that's where we're starting. I think beyond that, there's specific tactics like one that we kind of pioneered in the gig economy that we've been applying in regular work quite a bit is the whole notion of using shift differentials and variable pay. And and I'm not talking surge pricing for drivers or that kind of thing. I'm talking what used to be kind of the driver incentives like, hey, if you work Friday mornings, when we don't have anybody on the road, we'll pay you extra. Hey, if you work, 3 Saturday nights in a row, you'll get an extra spiff. So it's that kind of using incentives. And in the gig economy, we used incentives to try to move people to the schedule that we needed them to be working, because that's where we knew the demand was going to come. So we need to make sure the supply was there. In the regular kind of economy that we've been working in, the W-2 kind of standard employment economy, we've been using it as shift differentials, and it's particularly to incentivize people to join, to incentivize people to stay, to incentivize people to pick up extra hours in ways, we're not talking hitting overtime, but even just like, hey, we really can't fill this particular evening, so there's a shift differential on that evening. And the team and I have run just thousands of experiments over the past couple of years, working with some big employers on that stuff, and it all works.
Hmm.
It all really works. Kind of not surprisingly, right? The company has a bigger need in those time bands and, can pay more. So, most people are conservative when it comes to wages. They don't want to roll wages up only to have to roll them back and this kind of stuff. The differentials really help you to get out there and experiment and get creative around the edges in a way that is totally reproducible and doesn't mess up your kind of the equity of pay equity within the company.
I'm really glad you said
I
creative, because I was just going to say
Mhm.
talk about being creative and thinking outside of the box in such a
Yeah,
traditional, wage model for frontline workers. And yet here
yeah,
you are creatively motivating and incentivizing these workers to take certain shifts or not take certain shifts. So this is really
yeah,
incredible.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh just to
yeah.
add to, oh sorry, no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's all, it's there's a decent body of results out there, and if anybody's interested in starting down that path, by all means, happy to talk about it and share some of the learnings. There's a
Sounds
little
like
bit of
another
academic.
episode that we'll have you on
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
There are some papers out there published on stuff, but it usually focuses on search pricing, not so much on, driver delivery person incentives. But, it's every region in the gig economy kind of employs a couple of finance wizards who spend their day crafting stuff like that. So, like I said, you multiply that times between the different companies and all the cities, there's like a couple thousand cities worth of experiments, and then they're all experimenting every week. So there's a lot of innovation that's already kind of out there.
It's mind blowing to think about the amount of data and testing that you can do in a universe like that. And I say
Yeah.
it from experience when was starting my online ordering, white label online ordering solution. I did when Skip the Dishes, which is the Canadian Grubhub, was coming to
Hmm.
Victoria. I probably was one of the first people that signed to drive, and they were throwing $100. I was like, if you drive today, you're gonna get $100. And I was like, oh my God,
Right.
how does this work? So I'm quite familiar with those things, and I can tell you that one of the most amazing things is the that aligns with Gen Z and millennial and the whole thing and the smartphone and mobile culture is the gamification.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's a game, it's a quest, it's a something that you so I can
Right.
see the appeal and
Right.
the incentive is just beyond the actual money itself. But the fact that you have these little points and goals and things and activities to achieve that if you put in a platform like yours, I imagine, it could be just an incredible performance driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always the Pavlovian line, right? We don't want people to feel like lab rats, but we are using economics to incentivize people, and all that stuff really works.
I mean, with all that said, and kind of like I'm answering some of the question that I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case there's something deeper.
Fair.
So, what are some effective ways that restaurants that they can actually streamline operations from scheduling to onboarding and make things easier for their staff? Easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is the goal should be to aim for self-service. I think a big part of it is empowering people. So, regardless of the technology you use, the ability to sort of put it in the workers' hands, at least giving them that opportunity to say what hours they want to work, what conditions they want to work is super helpful. And then you still got to negotiate. Ultimately, it's a negotiation. No, it's not going to be all one-sided. But I think it comes down really to that. We try, like, and no shade for like frontline supervisors and everything, but we think there's a win-win in like getting the frontline supervisor out of the loop on a bunch of that stuff. Like they still can see it, regardless of the platform you're using, they can go in and see who's on and whatnot. They can override it generally in any kind of software. They're going to be able to go in and override. But really, honestly, I don't know many frontline supervisors that want to spend 5 hours a day chasing after people on the phone. So, I think it's a big part of it. Both give them some flexibility, give them self-service tools, get the heck out of their way. I think those are the worthy goals for whatever technology you're using.
Hmm. What about, I mean, this is maybe not the proper question, but it just came to
Yeah.
mind. Like we've had quite a few guests that talk about, in terms of operations and building a culture that it's quite open and where
Mhm.
they share about what some of the goals of the restaurant or the business has and
Yeah.
commit to a certain amount of bonus or participation on those aggregated revenues that the employee can be responsible for and have
Mhm.
visibility over that. How could you combine those both, like the gamified, which sounds a little bit more micro, and then macro at the same time, and keep a culture that it's related to a brand and related to an environment that they want to create that it's distinct between different restaurants? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And I think, it's a little bit in the direction of how productivity oriented can a restaurant be without losing its creative and its inspirational sort of culture. And, there are a lot of businesses where those two things are married up and maybe orthogonal or somewhat in opposition to each other. I think part of the way I look at it is the more that you can use robots basically to do the mundane stuff, it really does free up everybody's mind to focus more on the creative and the customer, whether it's customer service creative, how we're dealing with patrons, or whether it's creative in terms of offering and menu and experience. So I don't know. I think it's, you want a culture. Part of the culture has to be we kind of, I don't know if we can swear on this, but we kind of get shit done. Bleep me out.
Swear
Right? That's got to
away,
be part
Jason.
of the
Swear
culture.
away.
And we use technology to like not be bogged down in paperwork, right? Like the software takes care of the paperwork so that we're not bogged down in that, right? Like it just makes us more effective. Hand in hand with that is transparency, right? Because if the whole team is in the software and I can see who's taking care of what routines and where inventory is and everything else, then there's just a level of transparency around performance that kind of just starts to marinate in the team. That's really helpful. It's going to turn off people who don't like that, and frankly, you might not really want them anyway. But we definitely see that impact from transparency on the culture. If you look around the internet, you'll see some of our customers talking about, hey, man, this made it hard for our supervisors because like they couldn't hide. Like the whole team knew where they were and what they were working on. And, so they, found even in kind of a leveling up of their supervisors with better transparency under more accountability from the workers that we're reporting to.
Right.
So I think, there's a couple of different things there in the culture. It does help you kind of reformulate the culture. But, I'm kind of old school when it comes to culture. I think culture follows strategy. Like I think you have the strategy you have, and that requires a certain culture, and then you have to hire and fire and set up operations in a way that it reinforces that culture you need. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful, to state the obvious.
Right. So it would be like if someone doesn't get that they're freeing their time so that they can be more human and have that interaction with the customer, then they're not a
Right.
good fit.
Right. If they're using it for extra cigarette breaks, then you probably didn't want them anyway. Exactly.
Jason, this wouldn't be a restaurant technology show if we didn't talk about the future. So, Jason, I want you to take out your crystal ball, and I want you, from a macro standpoint, take out your crystal ball and what's coming in the future? What's the next big thing for hospitality, for restaurants in the tech space?
Oh gosh, I think there's if you go far out, there's a fair amount of robotics, and I think physical robotics, like robotics moving product. I think if you stay sort of in this next decade or so, I just think we're going to see more and more automation of everything around operations. I think it's just coming. The technology like ours with other technologies in sort of the white collar space, in marketing, your restaurant, and all kinds of things. There's just a ton of automation coming. I think if you kind of bring that back on, what does it mean is, how's my job going to change as a leader somewhere in an organization? I think we're all going to be more like commanding a certain part of our direct reports are going to be bots that we command. We'll call them smart agents, but they'll go off and they'll do stuff for us.
Yeah.
I think it does change a lot in software. Like there's always going to be a part of software that's going to be a license. Like I don't think Microsoft Office is going to start charging us dramatically different anytime in the near future. But I think you'll be paying basically compute time to agents that go out and do your stuff, might go do your purchasing for you, might go run your payroll for you, might go do different stuff where you're no longer really putting those instructions in or hiring a team around you to do it, but more sending off bots to go do it. I think that's the reality of, if I were coming out of high school these days, that's the reality I would be preparing for, because I think it's really just right around the corner.
Well, we can say for certainty that the robots are here. We had the
Right.
COO of Kura Sushi US
Right.
on the show a while back, and there's robots in the restaurant,
In the
back of
kitchen.
house, front of house.
Yeah.
They're serving dishes. So the robots are here.
Perfect sushis. Perfect sushi rolls.
That's right.
Yeah, that's probably the perfect use case for robots. I mean, there's so much precision involved in that prep. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
have a follow-up question in that visionary context that we're right now. Do you see that humans will interact more with each other, or are we going to lose that?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be bespoke, and I think depends on what you want. I think if you want more human interaction, the non-human automated stuff is by definition it's super cheap. The price will just continue to come down. It's like all technology cost curves. Eventually, it's going to be commodity, super cheap. And, we talk about universal income and we talk about, a world where you don't have to work because almost everything is automated that sustains our planet. I think if you go really far out, you can see a world where we're really just paying for very bespoke services. And, that's scary for some people. There are other people, give me the free automated option every time. There'll be people that want to splurge, maybe it's you splurge in the way today we splurge for a travel agent, right? Some people still use travel agents. They love it. They want the human touch. They don't care that it costs more. Everybody else is going over to Expedia. Thank you very much. Click, click. So I think it's just more of that. With the only exception that like this is going to go further. This is not,
Yeah.
going to stop at PCs and desktop and the kinds of things we've been talking about, but going to go straight ultimately into robotics that are, part of our everyday life.
Surgery, etc. Okay,
Yeah,
now
yeah. Taxis, it's stuff's here. Yeah,
this is the moment where
yeah, yeah,
I
for
get to
sure.
ask you if in one sentence, if you can, in one sentence, what piece of advice would you give to our restaurant listeners?
It's really easy and pretty obvious based on what we've been talking about, but it's
Yeah.
embrace automation. Embrace it.
Put
Yeah,
your arms around automation. It's a must have.
yeah.
It's got to happen.
It is. It is.
Thank you.
There's not going to be a market for people doing everything pen and paper old school. It's just, and to be able to do that, you're going to want the automation that allows you to have the scale, allows you to have the business where you really can do very, very bespoke things. But it's almost like I think from all that I've been seeing, last couple of waves of technology, it's really the automation ends up being the enabler that you get to do cooler and cooler things.
And be more human and get back to doing the
Exactly.
creative things that we talked about.
Exactly.
Really,
Yeah.
really great advice. Listen, that's all the time we have for this episode. Jason, now is your time to plug away. Where can people connect with you? What is your platform of choice?
Sure thing. I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm on a lot of platforms, but particularly on LinkedIn. And otherwise, please visit our website. It's Movo, Movo .co, movo.co.
I love the alliteration. That's great. Speaking of plugs, this podcast is sponsored by Dine Pricing, real-time restaurant profitability. Dine Pricing uses artificial intelligence to improve restaurant profitability by dynamically updating menus across digital channels like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Grubhub. Thanks again to Jason for joining us. Until next week, say goodbye, Jose.
Birdman, embrace technology and automation. Bye, Jose.
That's excellent. Jason, thank you so much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you. That was
you
awesome.
coming on the show and would love to have you back on in the coming months.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. Gordon, Jose, take care. Thanks,
My
guys.
pleasure.
Thanks,
You
Jason.
too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jason.